Welcome, everyone. My name is Liz. Work here with NCBA CLUSA. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll give folks just a couple seconds here to flow into the room, but we do want to thank you for joining us today. We're excited about this conversation on building successful partnerships between co-ops, local government, and private enterprise. We here at NCBA CLUSA are thrilled to have Paul Bendel with us this afternoon to moderate our town hall discussion. And we encourage you to share your thoughts throughout the conversation as well. This is a Zoom meeting, so we encourage you to turn your camera on if you feel comfortable with that. You're welcome to raise your hand, jump into the conversation at any point. We definitely want to hear from you this afternoon, not just our speakers. If you feel more comfortable using the chat box to engage this afternoon, you're welcome to do that as well. And with that said, it's my pleasure to introduce, actually to kick us off today, Tamla Blaylock, NCBA CLUSA's Vice President of Cooperative Relations. In a bit, we'll hear from Paul. For those who don't know him already, he is the Cooperative Development Director for the Center of Community Wealth Building in Denver, Colorado. And the center there works to create very people-owned, inclusive, and sustainable economy in Denver that supports prosperous and resilient communities, free from racism and injustice. So we're excited to have Paul and a couple other Denver stakeholders. But to kick us off today, handing things over to Tamla. Tamla, welcome.
All right, thank you so much, Liz. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone joining us here live and those who will be watching the video recording. I'm so happy to have in the spirit of, in the season of community, our, we believe to be scheduled town hall of 2022. This one was created, from connections from our June board meeting. So Paul's organization was so gracious and wonderful to connect us and host us for one of our board dinners, and you leverage that opportunity not only for us to meet the wonderful people of their organization at the greater cooperative community that they support, and even had a visitor from a well-known political figure. While that happened, I'll let Paul talk more about that. And from that, it's like, how can we leverage this opportunity about the great co-op community they've created through stakeholders and with local and state government, and share this opportunity with our members. And so we're doing it here. And as Liz says wonderfully, democratic dialogue for this town hall. So I will kick it over to Paul, who will introduce our wonderful group of thought leaders and cooperators in activity and spirit. And you all, as Liz said, are welcome as we're going through to turn on your camera and ask questions, or ask questions in the chat. The whole point is that we want to democratize it and not have a few city folk talking at people, but for us to share with each other. And then also through this dialogue, we can learn from each other among yourselves, and also hear directly from you what is really salient from you. So thank you for joining us, and I will kick it off to my good friend, Paul. So Paul.
Thank you so much, Tamla. Yeah, we're so excited to be here today and to be joined by representatives from both Kaiser Permanente and the Colorado Employee Ownership Commission. And so we were hoping to have someone from the Denver Economic Development Office, but unfortunately they had a death in the family, so they weren't able to join us today. Just so we can get introductions going, Jason, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, thank you so much, Paul, Tamla, Liz, thanks for having me today. Excited to be here and have a great discussion. I am Jason Weiner, he, him pronouns, and I am here in my capacity as a commissioner on the Employee Ownership Commission in Colorado. Nice to be with you all.
And Matthew?
Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Lucina. It's a pleasure to be here and to meet you all, see some familiar faces. I'm a program manager at OEDIT, the Office of Economic Development, International Trade, and the Colorado Employee Ownership Office is housed within OEDIT, and I support the Employee Ownership Commission and part of my work.
And finally, Avital.
Hello, I'm Avital Abudi. I'm with Kaiser Permanente. I'm actually based in San Diego, and I work on Kaiser's National Community Health Department. We also have offices in our 8 markets, Colorado being one of them, and I manage our economic opportunity strategy, in particular the diverse business growth work, which involves grant making and also internal business operations work to make sure that we're doing as much as we can to support the growth of diverse businesses, both through technical assistance and access to capital, but also by incorporating them more into our supply chain and really fulfilling our mission as an anchor institution.
Thank you all. So we wanted to bring sort of a conversation together of municipal, state, and also anchor leaders, just to kind of be able to open up a conversation on a national level of how do we get more support at higher levels for the economic development, for worker cooperative development. So just to kind of, I know there are actually a lot of people on this call. I'm seeing Charity and Annalise, who both have really strong, state and municipal support. So it's good to see you all. But I'm curious just to hear from some of the presenters, maybe from the state's perspective, Matt, if you could just comment a little bit, why does the state of Colorado care so much about worker ownership or about worker cooperatives as an economic development strategy?
Sure. I think that the research is pretty strong, showing, the opportunities that there are for these democratic structures and organizations. Looking at the need for succession planning in our rural communities as well as our urban communities is a great topic and a great entry point when we look at cooperative formations or conversions. So I think that there is a lot of research out there that shows that there can be a lot of wealth building, a lot of opportunities for individuals to get more than just a paycheck. The companies are more productive and the jobs are preserved. So I think that's, the state's interest there.
And Avital, I'm just curious if you've already said a little bit about Kaiser's priorities and why Kaiser decided to invest in employee ownership. But I'm curious if you just have a little more context for why you see it as a strategy, particularly as a health-based institution.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think folks are probably familiar with Kaiser as the largest integrated healthcare center in the US, but maybe less familiar with our work in the community health department, which is our really our grant making arm. And so we are focused in that department on addressing various social determinants of health, including housing, economic opportunity, climate justice, things like that. So I work within our economic opportunity strategy, and that's a really critical piece of the work because we see economic opportunity as really a super determinant of health. Physical and mental health, like one's financial security, is core to what allows them to access health opportunities. And so we know that also economic opportunity is not equally distributed. And so we're really focused on reducing the racial wealth gap and really focusing on, in particular, diverse businesses. Our economic opportunity strategy actually has 3 initiatives. One is diverse business growth, one is individual financial health, and the third is equitable career pathways. And we were particularly interested in advancing employee ownership and supporting co-op development because that actually sits at the nexus of all 3 of those. So it is also helping to create more resilient and prosperous businesses, but also spread that wealth across to have more of the employees benefiting from that business growth and increase their incomes and build wealth for employees and create better job quality within the businesses. So I think that this in particular is really helps to integrate all of the different aspects of economic opportunity that we think are vital in terms of both health, but also just the ultimate goal of ending the racial wealth gap.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Avital. I thinking so much as we were planning this conversation and, how to have it be applicable to anyone who is contacting in from the cooperative community and relevant. And I realized there was some universe and framework building, particularly like around like anchor institutions in that. So in this, I'm a comic book person, so this is in our Marvel Cinematic Universe, but in our co-op, amplifying an inclusive economy, this universe. So CIEU, those are a lot of letters. We'll work on that. Let's talk about what are anchor institutions and how they're particularly pivotal as like the foundation for how this a wonderful story has started. So I'll start with Avital and then go around about what an anchor institution is and how, that was pivotal to what your engagement, both anchor institutions, stakeholders, and government entities grew into.
Yeah, so Kaiser, we consider ourselves an anchor institution, and essentially the way that we think about that is as organizations, institutions that are rooted in the places where they're located and have generally an ability to hire a lot of people, have a lot of purchasing power, and therefore we think have a responsibility to really be good neighbors and really make sure that they're using their money to advance community wealth building and community health generally. And so in addition to our grant making work, we also are doing a lot of work internally to improve our own business operations and invite more diverse businesses into our supply chain and hire more diverse workers within Kaiser. And there's a number of different kinds of anchor institutions, including healthcare, universities, local government, many different kinds of institutions that you can think of in your own communities that are really important to engage and make sure that they're fulfilling those responsibilities. And we're also part of what's called the Healthcare Anchor Network. We're one of the founding members. It was started, I think, in 2017, and there's particular commitments that all of these different healthcare institutions that are part of the network have signed on to increase their spend with diverse suppliers and increase their hiring. And actually, one of the commitments is the impact purchasing commitment, which even spells out specifically the desire to work more with employee-owned businesses and really be able to track that and show that we've increased that spend with employee-owned businesses. And so actually, I'll just say one more thing about that is another, in addition to our support for the Center for Community Wealth Building in Colorado, another grant that we've made towards this goal of increasing employee ownership is to national partners, the Project Equity and Obron Cooperative, where they are actually talking to our existing suppliers within Kaiser's supply chain and educating them about employee ownership and trying to facilitate transition so that they can help to move some of these larger businesses along and get them to consider transition. And we've been able to transition, I think 4 so far.
Oh, well, that's awesome. And also a shout out to Obron Cooperative, who participated this past fall in our 2022 Co-op Impact Conference. So we'll make sure to link that when this is posted online. Paul, so
yeah, I think what I'm hearing is the inclusion of healthcare networks and hospitals in this process is it's sort of made easier through this chain of logic that hospitals care about social determinants of health, and they understand. Many hospitals accept that as a fact, right? I was reading a book called Inflame that talks about the 19th century and how we pinpointed, the ability to stop pain and use medicine. But now we're sort of realizing that so many of our diseases are socially determined, right? And that even climate change and the effects of climate change are socially determined, the impact that is. And so it seems like more and more hospitals are sort of embracing this as part of their mission. And I guess there's a contrast there because a lot of hospitals have traditionally, as nonprofits, they've traditionally given things to the community. That could be, discounted care or more charitable things. But for hospitals to make the jump then to economic development and to be thinking about their businesses and their supply chains as part of like an economic development strategy, I guess what advice, Avital, would you even give to someone who is maybe making the case to a hospital that is not in the Health Anchor network? How could you even go from a traditional hospital that may have a strong charitable mission to one that, like Kaiser does, has more of this social vision?
So you're saying kind of to entice them to think about becoming part of that network and making those commitments. And yeah, I think that really helping them to understand that link between health and wealth and the extent to which like people's ability to access all of these different financial supports is really having a significant impact on their health, and that we think about it as kind of upstream, that there would be reduced costs, and like the downstream and like the actual direct care support that they're providing within the hospitals, they can really address some of those impacts much earlier on and really see overall a greater health of their community. And I think also just really helping them to understand like that they are anchors and they have this responsibility to their community. But I think also the Healthcare Anchor Network does a lot of really fantastic educational events and like peer-to-peer networking across healthcare institutions, and helping them to really be in communication with each other and share how they've approached this work and the benefits that the different institutions have seen in making these commitments and making these changes within their own institutions. And so I think, I would be even happy to, if there are healthcare institutions and hospitals within your communities that you haven't seen doing this kind of work, or you look up and maybe they're not part of the network, we'd be happy to have conversations with them and figure out what we could do to bring them along that journey.
And going from that, because our 50 states and our territories are diverse, and how who would the anchor institutions be by what is thriving in that local economy. What are some of the behaviors of an anchor institution that might identify a large employer as an anchor institution, as someone who is active as an anchor institution? Avital.
Some of those things that you would notice them doing, that you could identify them.
Right.
I think, it starts with some of the work that Paul mentioned around like more charitable kind of work. You might grant giving or like reduced costs for low-income folks. But I think that we're starting to see more healthcare making grants to nonprofit organizations that are not necessarily charitable organizations, but working more on policy or working more on technical assistance and capacity building, community-based organizations that are doing organizing work. So I think looking out for where you're seeing healthcare institutions showing up in that way, and as funders, and I think also, I think that I would recommend even just like connecting with that Healthcare Anchor Institution network and figuring out like what resources they have to share with local institutions in your community.
And I would say, to respond to some of Tamala's question, typically universities, hospitals, and cities are thought of as anchor institutions, but there could be, larger businesses, or even I even think of the Broncos. Could the Broncos count as an anchor institution in Denver?
Yeah.
Like, could a sports team, and
It could, yeah.
And so they have this buying power, but I think what's unique about hospitals in this case is they do have this commitment to health, and they do understand social determinants of, and so that is sort of a way in to talking about worker cooperatives. I think from this, what we were trying to tease out earlier with, you know, the state government is that, you know, there is sort of an economic development argument there that's a little bit different and a little bit connected toward job preservation. Yeah, I think the state has a very different interest as well. Sorry, I'm seeing a question. So go ahead.
Right. Actually getting into those questions. Thank you, NCBA CLUSA board member Debbie Waggy, for these great questions in terms of anchor institutions. So starting with you, Avital, I also want to bring in Jason and Matt. In terms of your work as anchor institutions, have you worked with like home care networks or children's hospitals, and particularly among the co-op community credit unions? Have you seen any current engagements for anchor institutions with those type of organizations?
Was that directed towards me? I wasn't clear.
Yeah, well, you and also bring in Jason and Matt as well. If there are engagements they were aware of as well.
So have we engaged with other kinds of anchors like children's hospital, home care networks? I would say that actually some of the businesses that we've helped transition with our work with Project Equity and Oberon, there's actually been, I think, one or two that were home care businesses that were, it's hard to explain. They're not quite like Kaiser suppliers, but they're like contractors of Kaiser that we, refer out to them for outpatient support, things like that. And so some of those businesses, we have been actually really good candidates for employee ownership transitions. And so we've been working with some of those groups in that way. Children's hospitals, I don't know, but I would say in terms of credit unions, maybe more so than credit unions, we have a lot of partnerships with what's called CDFI, it's Community Development Financial Institutions. So we've done a lot of actually grant making to support the capacity building of BIPOC-led CDFIs to really make sure that they have like the internal capacity and also the dollars to be doing more more lending, more affordable lending in BIPOC communities where Kaiser is located. And so we recognize that access to capital is a particularly big impediment for diverse businesses, and CDFIs are often best positioned to meet that need. But especially the ones that are led by folks of color are really limited in capacity and access to capital themselves. So we've been doing work to strengthen those networks and really building up that ecosystem of support for diverse businesses in a variety of ways, both with CDFIs and TA providers. And so that's another area that I think is really important to look at, where there are existing CDFIs and where there might be room to grow more, because those are key partners.
Okay, great. Thank you. So taking a pretty good foundation for institution and how cooperatives in general can partner more for these economic growth opportunities and outcomes. And now let's look to how we take these building relationships and get involved with our state and local government. So starting with you, Matt, and Jason, you're also welcome to participate.
Yeah, I'll actually pass it over to Jason. Yeah.
Okay, we'll pass it over to Jason. Great. Jason, on you. How do we find out, as we have these goals to have further impact with our cooperatives, to find out what are the priorities of our local government? It's just like, how can we align the work that we are doing with our anchor institutions and connect with the priorities of our local government?
Yeah, thanks for the discussion so far. I think it's creating kind of a really important thread of kind of grassroots to political influence to meaningful impact in community. What Colorado's done a little bit uniquely is focus on an executive agency approach. Our now twice elected governor ran on an economic platform of employee ownership. He launched his first gubernatorial campaign from an employee-owned grocery store in Colorado Springs. So he's got the awareness really baked into his ethos, and it became really a central pillar of his economic agenda. Governor Polis has built and exited from several large-scale successful companies, each of which has incorporated some form of employee ownership. And so it was really quite easy in 2019 for stakeholders to propose a variety of ways that state government could pretty radically expand and deepen its commitment to employee ownership, and thereby deepen its commitment to community wealth building. The governor essentially created the commission to centralize the work of building the major kind of apparatus of employee ownership support within the Office of Economic Development and International Trade. It's the primary agency, cabinet level agency that reports to the governor on statewide economic development. Colorado is unique in that also the SBA offices around the state report directly to the governor. So there's quite a bit of power that can be wielded by executive action. We did have a bill in 2017 to create a revolving loan fund program for employee ownership. But that really reached fever pitch in 2019 when the governor issued an executive order creating the commission. And I think one thing that we do that dovetails with the work of anchor institutions is build the statewide apparatus for marketing, education, capacity building, and ultimately builds the supply chain of vendors and technical assistance providers. If anchor institutions make good on commitment to purchase from employee-owned businesses, we need the technical assistance support and the supply chain to build those cooperatives at scale. And so we've been able to kind of begin to plan that out, resource those organizations, the Rocky Mountain Center for Employee Ownership, the Center for Community Wealth Building, the Rocky Mountain Farmers Union. And we've really created momentum and gravity around Colorado's development landscape in a way that's durable. We've had roundtables with the legal community to build awareness around the opportunity for employee ownership transactions, CPAs, we've had banking roundtables. We've really elevated the idea of employee ownership. And again, parenthetically, also and importantly, community wealth building within the major halls of power in our local marketplaces. And so we're starting to build that supply chain in a way that can service conversions at scale, new startups at scale, and also collaboration at scale. Paul heads up the peer network for statewide worker cooperatives. There's an ESOP peer working group among our ESOP community. And so we're really kind of building the backbone for what has been done in other places through legislative action. And we think that, you know, this level of organization and coordination will enshrine employee ownership within OEDIT for administrations to come. And more importantly, will build the capacity to serve employee owners, communities that are building more community wealth in place, and for selling business owners looking at employee ownership. And we've seen those numbers tick up dramatically since we started tracking and we started collaborating at this level. It's been incredible to see in 3 short years with a pandemic thrown in the mix.
Okay.
One thread that I wanted to highlight that feels like it's part of both what Avital was saying and Jason is sort of the way that peer pressure builds, you know, and once you have a hospital that embraces anchor mission, you're more likely to have other hospitals pay attention and be like, oh, should we be doing this? You know, and similar when you have all these lawyers that are talking about, you know, employee ownership or financial professionals or even business owners, you start to see the ripple effects of just the people embracing this core idea. I'm curious, Matthew, if you would even be willing to comment like how Colorado's choices to launch an employee ownership office may have had ripple effects on other states, or if you have had any inquiries from other states that have sort of been interested in implementing different aspects of what Colorado has done.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. there is some increased activity. Other states are kind of looking up to Colorado based on, the establishment of the commission and the great work that they've carried out. Kind of the tax credit program, $50 million over 5 years, kind of to further incent businesses and offset their conversion costs when they're transitioning to employee ownership, which cooperatives is definitely included in that. There's a lot of increased activity of other states looking at, they often ask, what's the secret sauce? And I think Jason really hit the nail on the head when he spoke about kind of the diversity of the ecosystem here. And I think just the work of the commission and also the work of the Colorado Employee Ownership Office at OEDIT, it has really just been focused on kind of bringing these parties together and making sure that we're not duplicating efforts. There's some great expertise represented on the Employee Ownership Commission, and that was created by an executive order. There's great expertise that they bring because they're on the ground doing the work with their clients or customers. But we also have a lot of open reporting from organizations like Center for Community Wealth Building and other cooperative development organizations in the state. And then, there's also national ecosystem players. So I think like part of the secret sauce and kind of how we respond to those inquiries is often looking at kind of the diversity of the ecosystem and trying to thread all that together and make a thicker weave, if you will, so that all the resources are there for the end user, which would be, the employee owners that really want to form that cooperative or buy the business from the owner. So.
And if I may, I'd like to put that into context a little bit. So Colorado launched its Employee Ownership Commission in 2019. Shortly thereafter, Massachusetts resuscitated its Employee Ownership Office. It had been defunct since the 90s, and it did that through legislative action with a very small budget. California's bill that recently was signed into law by the governor was also a stakeholder-led legislative effort that has some funding and reporting to the legislature. I think it ought to be kind of, I want to put a fine point on this. Colorado's commission lives within an existing appropriation for the Office of Economic Development and International Trade. Everything that the commission has done, everything the Employee Ownership Office has done is through existing funding, no additional fiscal note through the legislature. But because of that, we now have this centralized organ to develop policy that includes a $50 million 5-year tax credit, which is unique in terms of the stimulus for employee ownership around the country. New York City has done some funding initiatives. Madison has done some. Now California has some. That largely go directly to the technical assistance community. What our tax credit does is sends a direct market signal to buyers and sellers, to the business community itself, to focus on employee ownership conversion with offsets for technical assistance costs. That 50 million has a leverage effect because it's going directly into the business, and it's specifically allocated for technical assistance. But by going directly into the business, it's now elevating employee ownership in the minds of the business owner. That it's now worth the squeeze to consider this. And also importantly, all of the advisor community is now looking at a pot of funds that they can help access, whether it's a business planner, succession planner, lawyer, CPA, technical assistance provider. They still have access to those funds. And this now creates the beginning of a level playing field that we have not had since the 70s, really. And so we think that this will dramatically and durably change the landscape for employee ownership conversion conversations as we continue to navigate the silver tsunami.
And I guess I'm curious after you say that, Jason, some of the people on this call are from much more conservative states with much more different legislative agendas. And so just thinking about that, I'm curious, what would be the major talking points that you would use in a state like Texas, or in a state where people and legislators may have reluctance to set aside a chunk of money for business owners?
It's really fascinating. Texas actually did. I saw an article in NCEO's newsletter in the spring. Texas actually had an initiative focused on employee ownership sometime in the spring. I don't remember the details. The good news is employee ownership is bipartisan. The only sitting U.S. president to ever utter the word employee ownership is Ronald Reagan. And it's no news to us that employee ownership polls quite nonpartisan or bipartisan federally. Statewide, our bills have had tremendous support. I've testified to committees, legislative committees on a number of employee ownership bills, and they tend to kind of emerge out of committee on a relatively bipartisan basis. They're viewed as generally kind of public sector supported business models, especially cooperatives that have in Colorado the longest history of cooperativism in Colorado is in the reddest of red places, conservative politics. The rural electric sector, the agricultural production sector, those exist actually exclusively in the conservative parts of our state. And so when we talk about cooperativism, we have the benefit of bipartisan legacies to draw from. And so what we're doing now is really connecting the kind of political discussion to create just different applications of the same business models. It really leaves people, I think, a little bit kind of stunned to think that this central driver of wealth preservation and creation in rural areas is actually the same thing that we're trying to use to build wealth and community in the urban corridors.
That's very well said, Jason, in that space. One thing I have noticed as a theme is that there seems to be a lot of interest and activity around conversion specifically. Does that speak something that can speak across many different states and legislatures and their preference? Why do you think particularly like conversions is particularly popular and resonates with lawmakers?
Well, one, the business community itself is a major source of wealth creation. Other than home equity, home ownership, business ownership is the second, if not by now, the largest driver of wealth creation in America, including in Colorado. That happens to be strongly aligned with political influence and interest in states like Colorado. We're looking at largely kind of an older white male business owner community that's transitioning these businesses into the next generation. And as we all know, when family is either unwilling or uninterested in that succession, they've got to look to alternatives, lest we let those companies be bought by out-of-state interests, private equity, or shut down altogether. So there's a strong kind of legacy play here. There's a strong community wealth building play to keep local jobs in the community. All of those strains resonate really strongly in Colorado. The other is that from a risk standpoint and a lending standpoint, it needs to be said that an operating business is substantially less risky and less resource intensive than starting a new business from scratch to achieve that level of scale and operability. And so to convert an existing business, we're really working with a historical profit and loss statement, existing relationships, operations, team, et cetera. In fact, so much so that on a side note, in another role, I've built a startup that focuses on building a portfolio of converted restaurant businesses into an employee-owned restaurant group. And the theory is it's a lot easier to maintain a business and tweak its performance and optimize it for employee ownership than it is to start that same business from scratch as an employee-owned business in a sector that doesn't generally reward employee ownership. And so I think it's just a resource allocation question at some level. The other is that there's already an existing engine of succession planning. We've partnered with the Exit Planning Institute in Colorado to do a statewide study to understand the drivers and inputs into succession planning. And it's no surprise that employee ownership is an underappreciated option, but serves many, if not all, of the motivations of sellers statewide. And so this is really raising the awareness of folks in the succession planning community and the private equity community.
Great, thank you for that, Jason. Paul, I also want to get into the story of your organization and also kind of connect it with the question we had from Beck Spoons, where there definitely, is an interest among income institutions, and local government with conversions. But there also is like a huge entrepreneurial spirit that exists locally, wanting to be tied with the employee user member ownership benefits of cooperatives. So let's get a bit to like how the Center for Community Wealth Building enters this, and also how do you make space for new business, new cooperative generation as well.
Yeah, I would say the majority of all the cooperative development we do is actually new cooperative development. We are currently in the process of developing some co-op conversion technical assistance support. But primarily to answer Beck's question, yeah, and we do a lot of startup and formation work. I guess, Tamara, are you asking more about the bigger story of how we got involved with Kaiser?
Absolutely.
Okay. So one of Center for Community Wealth Building's initial sort of, I guess, within CCWB, we have several programs. One is cooperative development, but another is anchor engagement. And so from the very beginning, we've been engaging with anchors and participating in the Denver Health Anchor Network, which is just a small group of hospitals in our municipality that are all part of the larger Health Anchor Network. And initially, the Denver Foundation, a place-based, foundation, was funding this anchor network to come together, but they basically shifted the anchor network, or they asked us if we would take it on about 3 years ago. And so CCWB has done that, and we've also continued to build relationships with other anchors in Denver. We presented to the Metro Mayor's Caucus, which is a group of all of the mayors throughout the larger metro area. We did that 3 different times, just talking about cooperative development, talking about the potential for cooperatives in their municipalities. And we also have developed relationships with universities. The biggest leverage that we found is like food businesses themselves seem to work really well with anchors. That has been our entry point to a lot of anchor procurement. We've done P-card analyses with different hospitals and universities and identified, oh, like this hospital or this university is spending $500,000 a year at Panera. How cool would it be to shift $500,000 to a local business that's Black owned, or to a local co-op? And so that sort of conversation is very, brass tacks and very simple numbers has been an easy way to start the conversation. And so as a result, some of our programming in our small business space has drifted towards supporting caterers and supporting them so that they can actually do business with anchors. And so they're more prepared to serve larger clients. So I would say the anchor conversation and sort of the relationships that began 4 or 5 years ago, we've just been continuing to invest in those relationships and to show up in those spaces. And so I guess over time, as more health anchors have embraced the social determinants of health, it has made sense for someone like Kaiser to say, yeah, we actually want to make a commitment. We see what you're doing with worker co-op development in communities of color, and we'd love to invest in this process for a few years and show us what you can do with this runway. And so that's sort of one of the, I guess the background is that sort of, I guess, moment of Kaiser investing was not something that happened overnight. It was a series of relationships, and it was a series of, I guess, conversations, one-on-one conversations with individual program managers, but also continuing to uplift cooperatives as an economic development strategy to that audience.
Okay. So in learning from this wealth of information that we've gotten this morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on which time zone you are in at this moment, first, I think the awareness of anchor institutions and like what, particularly as it exists in the Health Anchor Network and may exist, particularly around the United States, that these are great partners who are invested in the same goals that we have, particularly in the cooperative community. And then also with that making time to develop these partnerships intentionally, you allow for that relationship building and find where your goals are aligned. and then leveraging that and finding what are the opportunities with your local and our state government among their existing priorities. Again, through relationship building, because you see the connection of being involved in roundtables and commissions, both among your connections in your anchor network and also with your cooperative development institution or cooperative network, working with these anchor institutions. So we see that it's relationship building. It definitely takes time, but just what can grow out of it, you know, from this. I mean, for feeding all these people here today, Paul has done this through his network to deliver this content for you, you know, with the goal that we want to democratize this information and give people more access. So I see on this call a lot of good stakeholders with NCBA CLUSA. So I'm just curious, I'm gonna call on you. You do not know this is going to happen. What interested you in this conversation? And do you have like any additional questions or conversation items for us there? So first, I'm gonna start with you, Margaret, USDA. Just let us know like what interested you in joining this conversation, and if there are any other thoughts or questions that you have for the group.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm fascinated with what's going on in Colorado, the ecosystem that you have built, and how we can make that happen in other parts of the country. Just pure and simple, just curiosity and kudos to the good work that you guys have been doing. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that, Margaret. Let's see. Who else I want to talk to? So Megan, I seen you nodding along a lot. So again, like what interested you in this conversation? You know, I brought you out today.
I'm so happy to be with everyone today and hear about all this wonderful ecosystem development work that's going on. And we have been tuned into what's going on in Colorado, and we hope that we can do what we can to foster this type of ecosystem development across the nation. And to do that, we're working really hard on a website for the Interagency Working Group on Cooperative Development, where we want to include state, local partners and be able to have that type of information on this website that we maintain at a federal level. So to the degree that you are aware of this type of development, not only in Colorado, but in other states, we are really eager to hear about it. So again, thanks for calling on me, Tamla.
All right, no, thank you for that. Go ahead, Paul.
I'm curious if, I know we've talked a little bit about the partnerships and the relationships and the different points of, influence that members in Colorado have experienced, but I'm curious if others would like to comment about what sort of relationship building have you found most effective in your sort of efforts to build out cooperative ecosystems in your municipalities or states?
We'll call on you, Debbie. Can you tell us about what the goings on in the great state of Washington?
So I also sit, I'm sit on the board of the NCBA CLUSA, but I also sit on the board of the Northwest Cooperative Development Center here in Washington, and they're doing a lot of great work in building relationships with other co-ops. And ironically, I also have a relationship with the Seattle Good Business Network, which does a lot of work to uplift local small businesses, and they have several different kind of tentacles of how they do that work, focusing a lot on BIPOC businesses as well, but they have a whole food system ecosystem sort of network they've created, and community kitchens and supply chain connections for local restaurants, which has been very powerful. There's a Northwest Sewn arm of what they do, and helping local artisans get trained and kind of bringing back home the ability for sewing and artisan work to be done locally, because a lot of that has been outsourced to overseas. They've also done some work with type things. They have a thing called Seattle Made, where they're trying to promote organizations that produce and or manufacture here in the city of Seattle, and trying to expand that. And then I'm also very interested in the P6 initiative that NCBA CLUSA has in our credit union. We're a large credit union in the Seattle, Washington area. We just developed a relationship with REI, supporting their REI Foundation and the work they're doing with small local nonprofits. I just feel like there's this opportunity to kind of, where can we connect these dots on a larger level and pull all of these wonderful efforts that I happen to be aware of into some kind of workable, sort of real true partnership that raises that economic level. I also have belonged, that was speared by Seattle Good Business Network's called the People's Economy Lab. And they're trying to do some stuff around anchor institutions as well. There's with the democracy. There's just so much going on that I feel like, how can we tap? I'm just trying to get my head around, like, what are the ways that we can bring all these wonderful works together to make even a more synergistic kind of impact. And it sounds similar to what maybe you got going on in Colorado. So that's what drew me in. That's the kind of things that I think would, I don't know if I've answered the question on what makes good partnerships, but there's a lot of that work going on that I see that does really great work.
Oh, it was a perfect segue into our final few minutes to wrap this up. At thinking now that we're starting at the end of 2022 and 2023, it's knocking on the door to join us very, very soon. So start with Avatar, because you had a really nice recommendation in the chat. For those of us who are energized by this conversation, either attending it live or watching it on YouTube later, looking at particularly anchor institution that works in the one that you're in particular, someone was very motivated to develop a partnership with an anchor institution. What do you recommend as ways to get started in that process?
Yeah, I just put in the chat. I think, sometimes I know it can be hard to kind of find the right people in these big institutions to connect with, but really trying to explore if you can get connected to folks that are in the procurement space, to really begin understanding what are the different kinds of products and services that they need, where are they currently getting that from, and then like learn about what the actual process is to become a vendor, and then see if there are businesses in your community that you can provide technical assistance to help them begin that process, to be ready to take on some of those procurement opportunities as they come up. And so I think, if you're a nonprofit co-op developer, or like just a business support organization, or if you have those groups in your community, helping them to start to build those relationships and really like have their radar up for where the procurement opportunities are, and figuring out like what are the requirements. There may be different, insurance requirements for businesses, or what are all the different things that businesses will need to get in place to be ready when those opportunities come. And then I think in that process of learning about the procurement side, that's where you'll start to have, more conversations with that anchor and learn about, like, do they do grant making? Do they have particular commitments to community health and social determinants of health in different ways? Like that's, I think, I don't know that Paul in his initial conversations with Kaiser even realized that this is a whole other aspect of our strategy. And to be honest, we were actually just beginning our economic opportunity strategy grant making in 2020. And so CCWB was one of the first grantees in Colorado underneath that strategy. So I think that it's still something that's kind of emerging and new for a lot of anchor institutions. But I think especially, I would say, with a lot of the kind of racial reckoning that's happened, I think, in the last couple of years, and like the recognition about just like this focus on health and how social conditions are a part of that. There's more and more work being done in this space. So I think that you might find that there are other departments, other folks within those larger groups that are starting to think about how they can give back to the community in that way, and see what opportunities exist.
Okay, thank you for that, Avital. And to Jason and Matt, getting involved in even your local government can seem very intimidating. So what are very accessible ways for people to start to relationship build with the local government, particularly on these matters?
What I would say is, whether it's city council or legislative sessions, they're generally open to the public. Our employee ownership commission meetings are all open to the public. All the meeting notices are posted publicly. You all are welcome to attend. These are open meetings. So too are the minutes of the meetings. That's a great entry point to build relationship, hear what's going on, stay up to date, meet the players. But in local communities, I think it's really a question of, I think from a kind of working with state and local government, my thought is economic development agencies are a great place to start. They don't always have the language yet, but I think this stuff clicks pretty naturally. It was interesting. I met with a local economic development agency in town, in our community here, and while a lot of the content was resonant, you get quick pointers on where they would kind of, steer you to. But I think economic development agencies, city council meetings, county commissioner meetings are all open. And then chambers of commerce and other business organizations. That's a great way to meet anchor institutions. It's a great way to meet the kind of local business leadership. And I think that, we in the cooperative sector can do a lot through that kind of grassroots relationship building, just by meeting other kind of business owners and other business leaders in the community.
All right, thank you for that, Jason. Before I kick it off to you, Paul, to end it, thank you all so much for joining us. Those who are watching live and on video. We're working to democratize our conversations, and by doing so, we're also hosting further conversation on our co-op circle. So make sure you join that if you haven't already. And it looks like anchor institutions are another group we need to recruit in to support you in these conversations. So Paul, I will give the final thoughts to you for today's town hall.
I just want to say thank you, Tamla, for hosting the conversation and for bringing us all together. And thank you for, the folks on the call, the state and city, and also anchor institutions that are supporting cooperative development and investing in something, in a form of economic development that I think is deeper and longer lasting. So let's continue to do good work. Great to see you all.
All right, thank you all, and happy holidays to you, and take care. Thank you all so much. We appreciate you. Have a good day.